So a very good afternoon. So those of you that are regulars at our Lunch and Learns will know that what we try and do with these sessions is take a business related technology challenge and turn it into a sort of a practical session lasting around an hour, where we try to give you an overview of a particular piece of technology. And today we're going to look specifically at SharePoint, both in terms of its tools as a cloud storage device, its tools for collaboration, and also a little sort of sneak preview at some automation technology as well. I'm not going to do most of the speaking today, so I am very delighted to introduce David G from HG Tech. HG Technology are one of Ramsak's partner firms. We deliver a lot of joint 365 projects with them, and they've got some real specialist knowledge when it comes to the ins and outs of Microsoft SharePoint. So David, I'm going to pass over to you, if that's okay.
Okay, thanks very much, Dan. And here we go. So first of all, we'll just kind of look at SharePoint and how that works. So the presentation aspects of SharePoint and intranet. So what I'm going to do is just in a second, I'm going to go over to SharePoint. So this is a home page. So in the past, we would have looked at doing web designs for intranets and things like that. But now there's very much an internal opportunity for you to actually design your own intranets and internal communication systems, either for departments or for the company. And it's pretty easy to do. So we'll just go into that. So what I'm going to do is look at the intranet page design. We'll also look at links to documents and other things that you can add on. So hopefully we'll go. Okay, so this is our demo intranet page. What we've got on here is this is all out of the box technology, so there's nothing on here that we've added on or done anything to. In the past, we would have had a lot of fun and joy kind of developing this, but now it actually kind of moves very much the ability for you to do that internally. So what I'll do is just show you how you can create a page like this yourself. So I'll just look at how we would edit this page rather than start from scratch. So on here, I've gone into SharePoint. And I have a page. I could create a new page, but this is a kind of a blank page that I've started. And then if I click on edit, it then opens up. So I've got all of the feeds. So in this case, obviously, these things are added on already, just I suppose to make sure that the demo works and to show you the kind of the functionality that appears. So we've got a header section. We've then got this section here. So on here now, we can do all kinds of things. So we can add color to things. So just pointlessly, we can make that red, and we can highlight that in yellow. So you can do kind of fairly simple but quite nice things just for kind of editing a text box. So you can create present your own page. So that's just at the very start kind of thing. Then on here, what we then got, and this is really where kind of SharePoint is adding things, is we've got quick links to other areas. So we've created a quick link. So you can see on here, I've got something to business continuity that we'll look at a bit later on. So again, kind of these could be sub areas, or they could be linked through to other websites externally, and it's just a link through. So on here, if I click on that, I'm then seeing where the link is going to, the title of the link. So again, I can change that, and then I can use a custom image. So on that, to be honest, we generally kind of create a subset of standard images that we roll out to all our clients, and we just change the colors on them depending on corporate colors. Or you can just use standard icons that are within SharePoint, Microsoft and SharePoint themselves. So you just create a link, you add that, and that's it. So it's quite an easy way to create a fairly presentable way of doing it. This is exactly the same as above. The difference is that this is actually being shown as buttons rather than those links there. And you can just change it around. So you could do it as a grid, So obviously if you had 9, it would break that out into a more sensible kind of thing. Again, if you can do it as a film strip, and again, if there's more, it will scroll across more. The next area here, what I added on, I just added this on yesterday as an example. So on here, what we've got is we've got people profiles, and you can add more people on. So for example, if more people are in the organization, I can add, if my keyboard catches up with me. So I can add Paul on. And then once, so that's basically things that I've had. So how you add those is if I click on this, I then get to add a web part. So all these are web parts, so they're different web parts. So I think the joy of demoing is that when you go and show something, it always works slower than you want it. Okay, so what we had at the top was a text box. We can just add images to it. Then the things that we were adding on just then was links. So quick links is what we just added on. You can link it through to other things as well. So if you use Salesforce, you can add that. You can add Power BI. I don't know whether people have looked at Planner, which is another Microsoft product within the Office 365 suite or Microsoft 365 suite. You can add that as well. So all of these things, you can just basically add on new things to it. So it's an easy kind of process to just work through it and design yourself. So often we've worked with companies where we've created a page and then people have then taken it on internally for them to modify it and add new features. And then on here, this again is then just, so this is just a Twitter feed where we've added that on. So I can now republish that page. Now I'm happy with it. And that will save the changes and update the changes, and then that's accessible by everybody in the organization. So I've now got my horrible yellow, the red that I've done, and also you can see these links here, so I can see Paul, and then when I click on that, it shows what he's been working on, shows LinkedIn kind of images and things like that. So it adds kind of quite nice kind of functionality, and this is just all straight out of the box. So that was just a very quick look at the look and feel of SharePoint. Okay, so moving on. So now the next section, what I was going to do is look at SharePoint files and document management creation. So looking at how we move from one area, so how we transfer files from a local system to a SharePoint system. So SharePoint, it can act exactly the same as a file server. So in a very basic level, you can just take all your files from a file server or from your local drive and copy them to SharePoint. There's a number of issues with doing that. One is that you often lose information about who modified files and modified dates and other kind of document properties, but also you're not really taking advantage of some of the SharePoint properties that are provided out of the box. So the other things that we'll talk about is file versioning and powerful searches, the tagging and web interface. So this is just a view of a document library. So a document library on SharePoint is just an area. So it's like a local drive or a super folder, and we often refer to it as a bucket of files because we put all of the files in there, we tag them, and then we improve the ability to search and find for files. So when we did this demonstration last time, I guess this is probably easier as kind of as a discussion around a table of it, is one of the things that SharePoint kind of creates the opportunity to really look at is tagging rather than folders. So it moves you on from using a folder type structure or folder and subfolder type structure to a tagging structure. And there are a lot of advantages to that, and it's kind of a modern way of working. And I think, often now if you go onto the web, then you use search to find things. rather than kind of a hierarchical approach, which is the kind of the folder approach. And a good example of that is if I was going to buy some shoes from Amazon, then what I could do is I could choose shoes. So I would say, well, I want to buy some shoes that are kind of the latest shoes, and I can choose my shoe size and brand. And then I can also perhaps choose a seller, so I can say, well, I want them from there. And also I'm then on price. So tagging allows you to apply multiple filters to find something. And we'll look at that, how that applies to SharePoint. So tagging again and again, we'll look at this as filtering. So it enables you to kind of create practical, sensible filtered views, which you can then save and you can use either for yourself or for your team. But one of the big changes and big encouragements is that folders are created by individuals. Tags typically are an organizational decision. So what that means is that as a company, you define how you want the structure of your files to be stored, rather than it being an individual who will go and create a folder with a name one way, and someone else may create a folder in a different way and a different description, or even a different kind of structure. So it moves file storage to be much more consistent. And so where you've got fluid staff changes and you've got new employees coming on, the structure isn't to try and get inside the head of the previous person. It's very much it's an organizational structure. So there's kind of a lot of kind of sense and power in that. And the other thing as well on tagging is you can also attach flows to that. So some of the features that we've talked about within the document library, and again, we'll actually look at that practically in a minute, is searching, also sorting, so sorting by properties, quick edit, so you can edit tags or metadata tags against a library, and also you can pin documents to the top in the same way that you can pin documents in Word and Excel. Okay, so that's enough kind of PowerPoint. Now we'll attempt to go and look at what we would do in real life. So what we'll do is, let's see, so I'm just going to go through a file structure locally, and then look at how we would restructure that and move that to SharePoint. Again, there are lots of ways of structuring, so I'm looking at a purely tagging approach in this example. You can use tags and folders, or you can use folders. It's just it's very much kind of understanding the business case. So then I'm going to create a library on SharePoint and just show you how to do that. And part of the creating of the library will then follow that through in terms of renaming it and adding it to navigation so it's easy to find. And then we'll then create the extra columns. And finally, we'll just briefly touch on the data transfer process. Okay, so I've got a file area on, in this case, on my drive rather than on the server, and I'm looking at business continuity. So what I've got there is I've got 3 areas. So I've got my business continuity drive, and then within that, I've then got it broken down into 3. So I've got my disaster recovery files, my equipment list files, and my security. Now this is actually, as we'll see, it's actually kind of laid out in a fairly sensible way. So I've got the business continuity and disaster recovery folder, and then I've then got a subfolder called, in this case, let's say 2020, and then you can see that I've actually got files broken down by month. Now that's the way that I've decided to store my files. And so if we just go and have a look at one of the other areas, you can just see then in this case that it's all structured in the same kind of way. So the only issue on here is that actually I've got this file that's actually not stored within the structure that we would normally have. So again, that's an issue of files and folders, that it allows you to perhaps kind of store things outside of what you would do anyway. Okay, so this is, as I said, this is my file system. It's fairly easy to navigate. I can, if I think that the file that I wanted was in disaster recovery 2020 September, I can go there. The issue on this file structure is that if it wasn't in disaster recovery, I've then got a lot of other clicks to go back to security. Say, look in security, going to 2020, going into December, and say, oh, that was the file that I was looking for. So a folder structure potentially means more clicks. It often, it's often kind of structured well, but that's a local drive. So what we'll do is we'll look at how we'll actually kind of replicate that online within SharePoint. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a document library to store those files. So I want to move it from local to SharePoint. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, in this case, I'm going to, so I've clicked on the gear wheel, and again, this is something that it would be typical and it'd be an administration process. So it's not really expected perhaps that everybody would do this, but you would create your libraries and then people would then use those going forward. So if I do add an app, and then I'm going to add a document library. Now what we often do is give a library a very short name, because that's part of the location stored. So the shorter that location, the easier. So I can give it a short name like this. So I'm just going to put BCS. So that's created that. So what that's gone and done now is gone away and created a library called BCS. So what I'm going to do now is I'm now going to make some quick changes to that. So I'm just clicked on the 3 dots there and settings. So the first thing that I want to do is I want it to appear on my menu on the left hand side so that I can easily find it. And I also want to give it a clear name instead of calling it BCS. So I'm going to call it, sorry. Okay, so I've given it a new name, not to confuse it with the one I prepared earlier. So now I've got, I'm going to display this on the left hand side. So if I click yes on that, then that will appear over there. So I've saved that. Okay, so what I've done now so far is I've created my library. But what I want to do is, going back to this here, I want to create this as a tagged environment rather than as a folder and subfolder and sub-subfolder environment. So I'm just going to do it as one level. So let's go back and do that. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some columns. So the columns I'm going to create, I'm just going to call this a doc tag. And what this is doing is this is covering off disaster recovery equipment and so on. So I'm just going to do that. So what I want people to do is I only want them to, when they save a file to there, I want them to only use one of those 3 names for the document. So I want it to be categorized into the one of those 2, exactly in the same way as if I was to put it in a folder. Save me spelling. So now when people add a file to it, they then get the choice of one of those. So I can either have it as a default value, or I can set that blank. So I'm just going to create the other 2 columns quickly. So the other 2 that I had was the year. And this is a discussion point and part of the thing that we would talk about when we would go and create and talk to you about document libraries, is that I'm just going to do this in this case as text. I could do it as a number, and there are pros and cons to that, or I could do it as a date and time and just change the presentation of that. So actually I'm going to do it as year, and again I'm going to do it as a menu in the same way, and then I'm just going to put and again, so on here, I don't want my default choice to be 2018. I want it to be 2020. So I'm going to update that. So that then becomes the default value for documents. So then I'm going to do OK. And then last of all, I'm going to create an additional column called month. Right, so add that. And again, I'm going to do that as choices. And again, there's lots of ways of doing this, but just for simplicity, I've done it like that. And again, I'm going to just take that out. Okay, so what I've done now is I've created a document library called New Business Continuity Documents. So if I now go and look at that, there's obviously nothing in it at this point in time, but you can see that I've got these additional fields that are added. So when I go and add documents, which we'll see in a minute, what that will do is assign those things, those tags to it. So there we've created the structure. So the next thing then would be to do the document transfer. Okay. So you can drag and drop, and we'll talk about in the next part, and there's kind of pros and cons to that. But in terms of if I wanted to move our original list of documents, so if I want to take all of the documents from here, then I would select all this, and we actually have a tool that goes and selects that, and then what we would then do is drag it onto the document library that we created. And you can see in there, I'm not sure how clear this comes up, and probably highlighting them doesn't help, but I then additionally got the doc tag, the month and year to assign the values. And what I've simply done is I've just broken down the file path, so I know that the first folder level was related to the document tag, and then the next one was related to year, and then the fourth one was actually related to month. So actually when we run our transfer tools, what that does is it breaks it down in the structure that's been defined. The other things that we can do at this point is that we can also change information such as who it's modified by, and modified dates and so on. So this tool is what we actually use to do large kind of data transfers. So so typically you would do multiple libraries. So that just very quickly gives you an example of how we would actually look to move files from local to online. So yeah, so Dan, were there any questions so far, or anything that people have raised at all?
No questions as yet.
Okay, yeah, fine. Maybe I should try and make it harder. Hopefully it's kind of been fairly clear, kind of how we're going. So does that kind of make sense in terms of going through it?
Yeah, I think this is good. This is great.
Okay, good. Okay, so now what we'll do is we've talked about creating the library. We've pretended to do the transfer, which obviously I've done earlier, and we'll come back to that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at actually working with documents on SharePoint. So saving and working documents to SharePoint, file uploads to SharePoint. So how you actually, on a day-to-day basis, how do you put documents into SharePoint? We'll also touch on collaboration, and we'll cover other very nice features like version control.
Sorry, okay. There is just one question just come in, which is the file transfer tools that you're talking about. Are they something that that comes with SharePoint, or is that a specific HG Tech tool that you're using?
A specific HG Tech tool. So it's not something within standard SharePoint. There's always kind of talk of that, and there's apparently a product in that Microsoft have in the States that we keep watching to see whether it will be brought over to the UK, but currently not. So that would then, we would expect it to be included within the kind of the SharePoint environment. There is a limited SharePoint transfer tool that does come as part of SharePoint, but doesn't really provide the kind of the flexibility that we're talking about in terms of taking folder names and then creating tags from folder names and things like that.
So in reality, it's the difference, isn't it, between creating something from scratch, maybe as a new business startup where you just create your folder structure yourself. If this is part of a project of migrating you know, many years worth of files from a server infrastructure, that's where sort of the conversation with Ramsack and HG comes in, really, because it can be done brilliantly or it can be done badly, I think it's fair to say.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and that's kind of, I guess, the issue that we don't really get with this kind of thing is that it's a mindset change in terms of if you wish to use tags over folders, and that's an organization needs to buy into that, and it also needs to be done in a way where companies don't go overboard on tags. I mean, I've shown an example with free tags, while strictly I think we would probably recommend most libraries have two as a maximum, and possibly, you know, in a lot of cases only one. And the other thing as well is, you know, we would look at the potential of whether it's appropriate to combine folders with tags. So example of that, we obviously have customers, so we actually have a folder for every customer. But what we then do is, when I was saying this, that we would then have a tag which would be to indicate that file was data, and then we would have another flag to indicate the year of that file. So what we can then do within kind of GDPR is say, actually, you know, for anything for 2018 we should now delete, and then, you know, 2021 we delete all the 2019 files, and so on. So actually, you know, there are a combination of using both folders and tags is appropriate, you know, in certain cases. Okay, so moving on. So there's ways in which you can put, when you're kind of day-to-day working with SharePoint, so you can upload files. So there's an upload button within SharePoint, which is just kind of the easiest way of doing it, but well, actually second easiest. I think the easiest way of doing it is basically from drag and drop. So I'll just show you that, or attempt to show you that within Outlook, and also from within File Explorer. And then we'll then look at how you attach files to Outlook from SharePoint, so how that works. And then we'll then talk about internal. So now, if we want to share files internally, we don't email them as attachments. So what we would do is we would go to SharePoint and copy the link, or typically what I would do as well is from within the file itself, there's a share button, which I would then go and share with one of my colleagues and say, look, can you edit this, or can you update your part of it? And what that does is it reduces, you know, the number of times that you have a file in different locations. So if you email it, it's in its original location, it's in your sent items box, it's then in the recipient's inbox. They will then save it locally, and they will then probably send it back as an attachment back to you. So by this point in time, we've gone from one file to 5 or 6 different versions of the same file. By just sending the link, what we then do is we're all working off just one file. And as I'll hopefully show you on version control, it's quite easy to move backwards and forwards between versions as well. So if you're concerned about the changes or you want to go back, it's quite easy to do that. So copy links and share are really very powerful features of SharePoint that really make a lot of sense. And again, so we'll just talk about sharing a file and how people can be in it at the same time. Okay, so right, so demo time. I'll just have my crib sheet beside me as well.
She's one of the questions that's just come in, David, is about sharing with people external to your organisation and how easy that is to do.
Okay, so that's I guess it's not a 2-minute answer, to be honest. So typically, and we'll talk about that a little bit in automation as well later on. So yes, you can share, but the issue of sharing is whether you're opening up the area for other people to access. So what we would encourage people to do, and we often do this, is that we would create an external SharePoint site that's separate from your internal SharePoint site, and you would then transfer files or work with files that you want to share to that area. So you're then controlling where people have access to. And again, we do that for some people for automation, and I'll kind of touch back on that in a minute. Just so the issue of sharing is, so the answer yes, you can share. The question is, if you share, what security considerations does that throw up? So that's the question, and that's the consideration on that. And there's kind of discussions about how that should be done.
I think it's a good point, isn't it? That if you're sharing, it's remembering what you've shared, because if you shared a folder, you've effectively then shared everything that goes into that folder at any later stage and any subfolders created. And so the risk becomes that if you enable your staff to open up sharing of folders, there is a sort of a data protection concern about remembering what has and hasn't been shared, which I think is why you have that advice of having a separate site where you're reminded effectively that is publicly shared.
Yes, and we then deal with that to some extent with automation, which I'll talk about as well, kind of coming on to that. Okay, so this is what I'm going to attempt to run through, so to try and kind of show SharePoint in action. Okay, so uploading. Okay, so on my library here, just very simply, I've got an upload button, so I can upload a file. So I go to my upload examples and I'm going to upload that. And then you get a little message appearing there. So that's the kind of the easiest, well, probably the easiest way of doing it. Okay, so the alternative, so on here, so if I open this drive, and this is probably even easier. So if I want to put these 3 files into there, what I can simply do is just basically go and drag and drop. So you can see hopefully on my screen that I've now got a blue area to kind of imply that they're actually going to be uploaded, and then I get the free message that the free files are now being uploaded on there. So again, it's kind of a nice and simple kind of thing to do it. Okay, so what you can see on here, and this is again kind of like a discussion probably in a future point, but I had the default value set to year on this, so that's why they're being populated, but the doc tag and month aren't. So again, there's kind of considerations of the process of doing that, which is similar to how you'd actually want to go through and put things in folders. So we'll kind of come back on that. Okay, so also, so within Outlook, click on that. So that's a pain. So what I'm doing there is I'm just deleting it because I just about realized that I was just about to load the same file again. So I just get an error of saying that the file already exists. So I just basically, in the same way, I drag from within Outlook and I just drag and drop it onto there. So you can see that that's then just kind of uploading. So that's so it's a very kind of simple way of uploading files to SharePoint. The easiest way is drag and drop. And then if I then wanted to tag these documents, so up the top up here, I've got a quick edit which opens it in a kind of like a spreadsheet type view. And the joys of demoing is that it always works slower than you want it. So on there, so where earlier we'd defined our categories, so equipment list, and then what I can do is I can say, well, actually these are all related to equipment, and I can drag that down, and then I can then choose my month. So let's say May. Not for your sake, Dan. And then there we go. So on there, what I've then done is I've just tagged all of those documents. Okay, so that's just showing you documents and dragging and dropping between the two. Let's minimize that. So okay, so we'll now look at file collaboration and saving files from within Word and so on. Okay, so on here, what you can see up there is I've actually got this document and I've pinned it to the top. So if I click on this then I've got the option to actually pin a document to the top of a library. So it just means that if other people, so that's for everyone to see. And so it just means that people could all go and access the same document at the same time. Okay, so what I want to do is that, so I've got this document now and I want to edit it. So I'm going to click on the document. So again, this is there are setting options. So on here, I've got this document or this library, and it's library specific, to open in the browser. What I can do is, and again, it's a setting choice, you can have it open in the desktop. So if I click on that, then this will then go and open it up in Word. Okay, so on here, this is my document, and you can see it was last modified 54 minutes ago, and so I've got my document on here. But also, you can see up here that Paul is actually editing the document. So I can go to the location where he's editing, or I can actually, maybe you can actually see him editing, hopefully on there. So that's taking me through to where he's actually going. So I actually, so you can have multiple people editing a document at the same time. So that's kind of a powerful feature of SharePoint and Word. And then at the top up here, if I click on this, I've got version information. So again on here, so this is what I was saying about, you don't really need to email documents around. You've very easily got the ability to go back to a previous version. So I can go back to the one that I edited yesterday at 1:45, or I can go and view the different versions that Paul's been working on. So again, that's version history on there. So if I wanted to save this to SharePoint, I could then do File and save a copy. So I'm going to create a new copy. And so by default, I'm already in that library, so I could just give it a new name. And again, we were saying that because of this, there's not so much a need to put version 2 on things, because you've got the version history. So you just do that on there. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm just going to have a 2021 document ready for next year. So then I would save that. So what that's doing now is just saving, and it's saving to SharePoint. So obviously there's lots of advantages of that in terms of backup, etc., etc. So if so the other thing on there as well, I don't know whether people use this, but obviously you've got your recent documents, but what you can do, my Power BI document is very useful. I can pin a document. Again, kind of the joy of demonstration, and then things on there will actually show once they're pinned or once I've managed to click on the button correctly. So for kind of key documents, it's a very easy way to store documents that you're working on regularly. So pinning works in Word and Excel and PowerPoint, etc., as well as within SharePoint. So
a couple of questions coming in, David. So first of all, from Jerry, just you showed there the opening the document in the browser and then clicking on the button to open in the desktop app. And Jerry's just asked a question about if it's possible to have all documents opening in the app rather than by browser.
So yes, okay, so yes, not sure about Mac. So if you're on the Mac, we're looking at that, but certainly on a PC, what you do is you define the library, you define the action on the library. So we can possibly show that. So on here, so if I'm back in the library, and then we've got library settings, and then within the library settings, you can define, again, I'm probably not going to find the right place to do it. Not sure if it's this one or, but within the library, you define whether it's open in the client, and you also define it. So you define on there how you want it to open. So open documents in the browser or open documents in the client application. So you just change that to. And then that would then set it so that it would always open Word documents in Word, Excel in Excel, and so on and so forth.
Hopefully that answers your question, Jerry. And another question, yeah, it does. He says it does. Brilliant. Thank you. A question from Catherine, really around sort of security and access. So Catherine asked the questions about, can you limit access to certain groups of users?
Yes. One of the things we've glossed over today is the hierarchy of SharePoint, so SharePoint is broken out into sites and then for documents then into libraries. So typically, and again we'll probably talk about the next bit, but yes, you can define people into groups, and you can then give people groups into access either into a site or into a library within a site. So yes, very much you can break that down. So hopefully that covers that. Okay, so I'm just kind of conscious of time. So we talked about copying links, versioning, and so on. So just moving on. So just talking about, and this will also answer, Dan, the question that you just had to some extent. So SharePoint and automation. So I've just hopefully got a few examples to run through, and that will talk about that. So okay, so yeah, so this will cover kind of a number of questions that are raised. So we've done all kinds of data and automation type things with SharePoint and with lists and with documents and so on. So one of the examples, we get a monthly email reminder for contract renewals. So you put your contracts documents on, you set some tags on there in terms of when they're good for, and then a month before they run out, you get an email message to say they should be reviewed. Another example, so just again talking about automation, invoice process. So we get a supplier invoice in, we scan it, and that emails to an email address. The automation then runs and moves that attachment to SharePoint and attaches various information like the supplier and invoice number and stuff like that. Also gets automated into SharePoint. And we then have the authorizer then logs on to that area of SharePoint where only he has access to it, and he then authorizes it. And when he authorizes, it's actually recording his username, so it can't be authorized by anyone else, and it's just recorded on that. So there is very much a lot of kind of powerful security control that you can apply. Another thing that we talked about in terms of regard to documents, so for one of our customers, we created a SharePoint site where their subcontractors log on, see their projects, work on their project documents, and they only have access to their own projects and their own library of documents. So it's off-site or off SharePoint to the organization. There's no connection to the internal documents that the company uses. So there's, the subcontractor can't see, say, finance or HR or admin or anything like that. He can just see access to the documents and libraries that he's been given access to. So another thing that we've talked about or we've done is staff onboarding, and I know that you've done some stuff with that as well. And we've also, I think, done things kind of jointly where we work with a client in terms of them kind of creating the staff onboard process, and then that sends an email to Ramsack for them to go and create it, and then Ramsack ran their own automation process to finish off the setting up of the user. So there's a couple of automations there, again with joiners and leavers, and also, so I think again for security we often do a HR security area. So typically the way that would work is you would have a library, you'd have a site by division or department. The department manager then has access to everything within that site. Within that site, say the person has 5 subordinates, each one of those people have their own document library where their documents are stored, and so the manager can go into the document library and the individual can go into the document library, but no one else can. And then the final thing again, and this is talking about security with third parties. So we have a finance company, and they have a funding partner that they want to share documents with. So what they do is they tag documents in the library, and that tag then causes a workflow to send through to move or copy that document from the internal system to the external SharePoint system, and then the funder then can get an alert to say, new documents have been added, or we've created a new investment, please have a look at this. Okay, so these are all functions of using SharePoint and Power Automate. So just very quickly. So within SharePoint or within Microsoft Office 365, you get all of these apps down the side. So this is just one of them, which is Power Automate. And on here, these are just example templates that you can create. So there's all kinds of templates there. So ones to do with emails, productivity, and so on and so forth. And you can also see that it connects to a lot of other things as well. So we do ones with Dynamics, obviously with Outlook, a lot with SharePoint. So there's a combination of SharePoint and Dynamics would be a typical example. So all kinds of things for Power Automate. And then just giving you a very kind of quick example of one that we've done internally. So on here, you can see this is an absence system that we've created on SharePoint. So what it's using is SharePoint lists for access, for controlling data, and then we just basically go through and we create absence records. So on here, if I look at my user on here, so my user's got requested absences. I'll just refresh that. So you can see that all of her absences have been approved. And if I go into her email, I've also then got an absence confirmed to say that that holiday has been approved. And again, that's all automated. So once you've gone through, so if she was to request a holiday, she would click on this new absence. This runs something called Power Apps, which creates the form. So she'd put her request for her holiday. And then a reason, if there was any reason. And then she would then save that. So that then fires off all of the information. And then as well, we have a calendar, and that then populates the calendar once that's been authorized. So on our leave calendar, it will then show who's been off or when she's off. So it then gets all of that information. So it populates that calendar. Also within that calendar, I could potentially, I probably wouldn't choose to, but I could connect that to Outlook, so I could see that from within Outlook. So I can see all of that. So all of that is using a combination of Power Automate and SharePoint data lists to drive absence.
I think Power Automate is something that's really exciting, and you're going to see much more talk of that coming over the coming months, and we'll be running some dedicated sessions around Power Automate. Really, this is obviously David's given an example here of holiday booking, but really it's the ability to automate any repeatable tasks. So we've done work with a couple of people on this call, actually, David, where they're making a lot of job offers, for example, and that job offer each time required a standard letter going to them with their own personal detail fields filled in: name, address, job title, salary, line manager, for example. The creation of a contract, the creation of a reference request, and the setting up of a folder on SharePoint. And this particular organization was offering perhaps sort of 20 or 30 jobs a month, and each time that process was taking sort of half an hour. And with Power Automate, you fill in that detail once in a Microsoft form, press send, and the documents arrive within 30 seconds. And I think it's very much the automation piece is going to be big technology talk, I think, over the coming months. Would you agree?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that Microsoft have been pushing that, and I think they changed the name last year, and I think it's because of one of their kind of key technologies, and they expect that to grow probably exponentially. So yeah, okay. So those were my things that I was going to run through. I hope it wasn't too dry. I'm sorry that's it's just kind of the first time of doing that, and hopefully it was informative.
It absolutely was, David. Thank you very much. And I think obviously in this last 7 weeks, we've all entered a brave new world of delivering everything online, and it's always a challenge, but the technology didn't let you down. It was brilliant. Well done. hopefully that was useful to you all. So thank you, David. Happy to sort of stay online and answer any questions. So there's a couple of questions coming in on the chat bot now. Emily asks a question about SharePoint integration with Teams. We migrated read the question, migrated to Microsoft recently, showcase Teams to everybody. Yeah, so with Teams, it works brilliantly actually. Obviously we're using Microsoft Teams for this call, and I think within the Teams integration, you've got the ability along the top of all of your Teams channels to add various libraries, to add tabs. Yeah. And SharePoint is an out-of-the-box tab. So, for example, in our marketing department, we have a team set up in Microsoft Teams, and rather than having to browse out to find our marketing SharePoint library, that's just integrated automatically straight into Teams. So it works really well, and happy to get on a call and just demonstrate that for you, Emily, at some point. Simon's asking about costs for Power Automate. I think the great thing about Power Automate is, yes, there is a license fee for it, but the license is only required by the person that's actually building the automated processes. You don't need a Power Automate license for everybody that is then following a process. So it's relatively inexpensive. It needs some skill, and you know, by all means, if that's something that you're wanting to do, then talk to us about that, because it does require some. I wouldn't say you need to be a programmer, but you certainly need some skill in using Power Automate. But it's not an extortionate fee.
So on Power Automate, where we've done implementations with that, we've often encouraged the user to create, or the company to create a user called perhaps Flow or Power Automate or automation, and then also to apply the Power Automate the lowercase license, because that costs I think the first one is £30 a year, and what that does is that speeds up the process. So the free version, you get a process, but that can take anything from between 5 to 15 minutes for it to run, while the paying £30 gets that I think under 5 minutes. You know, and for the cost of that, it kind of seems worth it. And you're right in terms of that, you're only buying that license for the single designer or creator who's running that flow. So we've kind of paid the price a little bit for this, in that originally we created flows based on different users, but as you know, they leave or change or whatever, we're losing the flow. So what we would say is create a user, put all your flows under that user where it's appropriate to do so. So you've got better control over that over the longer term.
Brilliant, thank you. I'd also just point you in the direction of our website at ramsac.com/events. All of our planned Lunch and Learn events we have transformed into webinars this year, or for the rest of the year. So there's lots of events online that you can sign up to. And from any page on the Ramsac website, you'll also find a link at the top to COVID-19 resources. And we produced quite a lot of content over the last 7 weeks of documents that we think you'll find useful in terms of assistance with working from home, and increasingly over the next few days you're going to start to see some documents around the return to the office considerations, and a lot of information around IT security and cyber resilience for the current climate, where a lot of people are working in unusual ways. So I just signpost you to those on our website at ramsac.com. In the meantime, thank you very, very much for your time today. It's been brilliant having you all here with us, and a big thanks to David for stepping in and turning his in-person presentation to an online presentation. I hope you've enjoyed the session today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Many thanks. Bye-bye.